The orientation packet for the human diplomat came with 17 warning labels. One of them simply said, "Don't look her in the eyes." 3 days later, my crew was laughing. My diplomat was humming human songs, and an alien species that hadn't smiled in 400 years was asking her to stay. Let me tell you something about orientation packets. In the 42 years I, Ambassador Vrail 9 of the Solvaran Diplomatic Corps, have served across 11 star systems, 4 contested nebulae, and 1 deeply uncomfortable trade summit on the methane moon of Gorath 6, I have never, not once, received an orientation packet that came with 17 warning labels. 16, sure. 16 is a normal number of warnings for something that could theoretically kill you. 17 means someone added 1 more at the last minute after remembering something they almost forgot. That extra one is always the most important. The packet was titled, Briefing for Assigned Personnel, Interaction Protocols Regarding Earth Liaison Representative, Lieutenant Commander Sable Oren. It was 43 pages long. The cover page had a small symbol on the bottom right corner, the Universal Solvaran glyph, or Please Reconsider Your Life Choices. I had only ever seen that glyph on documents involving black hole proximity operations and the Gorath Methane Moon Summit, which, as I mentioned, was deeply uncomfortable. I sat in the briefing chamber with my crew. There was Caro Fell, my junior diplomat, who was 26 cycles old, recently graduated, and had the specific brand of overconfidence that only the young and the catastrophically undertested can maintain. There was Navigator Thessaly 1, who was excellent at her job and made no secret of the fact that she found most diplomatic missions a prolonged exercise in scheduled boredom. There was Chief Engineer Bodrak Sim, who communicated primarily in exhales that ranged from mildly disapproving to deeply offended. And there was our ship's medical officer, Dr. Fen Kalek, who had the bedside manner of a disappointed librarian and the diagnostic instincts of someone who had seen everything twice. The instructor assigned to deliver the briefing was a veteran diplomat named Overseer Proth Kulen. Overseer Kulen had gray at his temples and the eyes of a man who had filed too many incident reports. He walked into the room, set his datapad on the podium, looked at all of us for a long moment, and said, in a very calm voice, "Rule number 1. Do not make prolonged eye contact with Lieutenant Commander Oren." Caro Fell raised his hand. "How prolonged is prolonged?" Overseer Kulen looked at him. "More than 1 second. That seems," Caro Fell said, "very short." "Yes," said Overseer Kulen, "it is." Nobody asked why. There was a quality to Kulen's delivery that strongly discouraged follow-up questions, the same quality that emergency evacuation instructions have. You don't ask why you should proceed to the nearest exit, you just proceed. He went through the remaining 16 warnings. They covered things like, do not let the human reconfigure any equipment without supervision. Do not accept challenges to any game of skill or chance. Do not ask her about a place on Earth called the DMV, because the story goes on for 40 minutes and ends with a philosophy, and do not, under any circumstances, try to out-explain her. The last page of the packet was blank except for a sticky note. The sticky note was old. It had been there long enough that the adhesive had dried out and someone had taped the note down instead. It said, in the handwriting of the previous alien envoy assigned to work with Lieutenant Commander Oren, 1 single word. Don't. I kept that page. I am looking at it now. I should have listened. She arrived on a Tuesday, which is apparently a day on Earth, and she arrived the way that I now understand all significant events arrive, quietly, without fanfare, and at a moment when everyone has slightly let their guard down because nothing has happened yet. The docking bay was clean. My crew was arranged in appropriately formal positions. Bodrak Sim had, for reasons he never fully explained, polished the secondary hull panels. It looked very professional. It looked like a diplomatic vessel receiving a dignitary. Sable Oren walked through the docking tunnel with a bag over one shoulder, a second bag in her hand, and the expression of someone who had done this enough times that the novelty had worn off but the interest had not. She was, as the briefing packet had noted, smaller than average for a human. This did not seem to matter to her at all. She stopped, looked at the five of us standing in our formal arrangement, and said, "Oh, you did the whole lineup thing. That's really sweet." Nobody had described it as sweet before. She introduced herself with the exact same energy that someone uses when they've just arrived at a party and they already know it's going to be a good one, which is to say, warmly, without hesitation, and with the specific assumption that everyone was going to get along. She learned all of our names in approximately 90 seconds. She repeated them back correctly on the first try. She then asked Thasali 1 what the best part of navigating a ship like ours was, and Thasali, who I have never seen express anything close to enthusiasm in 4 years of service together, said, "Honestly, the jumps. When the coordinates lock in and everything goes quiet right before the drive fires. I love that." There was a pause. Thasali looked mildly surprised at herself. Sable Oren nodded like she had just received the most reasonable answer in the world and said, "That sounds incredible." I made a note in my field log. I wrote, "Subject is smaller than predicted. Effect is larger than predicted." Then she found the ship's AI interface panel in the corridor, patted it twice, and said, "Hey buddy, what's your processing speed?" The AI, which had never been addressed as buddy in its entire operational history, took 0.3 seconds longer than usual to respond. I do not know what that means. I choose not to investigate further. Within 4 minutes, my crew's baseline risk assessments had been quietly revised upward by an average of 31%. I began to understand what the sticky note was trying to communicate. I want to be fair to Caro Fell. He was young. He was curious. He had been told, explicitly, in writing, with 17 warning labels, not to make prolonged eye contact, and he had decided, with the beautiful confidence of someone who has not yet been wrong in a way that costs him anything significant, that this was probably an exaggeration. It happened on the second day. Sable Oren was explaining something to him about Earth geography, specifically about a region called the American Midwest, which she described with the particular tone of someone who has a complicated but ultimately affectionate relationship with a place. Caro Fell was listening with the polite but slightly distant expression of a diplomat who is technically paying attention. And then she said some observation about how the landscape looked at a certain hour of the day, and she looked directly at him while she said it. He looked back. 1 second passed, 2 seconds passed. Somewhere in the second second, something happened to Caro Fell's face. It was subtle. It was the kind of change that a medical scanner would catch but a casual observer might miss. His expression, which had been politely diplomatic, shifted into something that I can only describe as genuinely engaged. Not professionally engaged, not diplomatically engaged, actually sincerely, personally engaged. 3 seconds passed. "That sounds," Caro Fell said, slowly, like he was choosing each word with care, "actually really beautiful." Sable Oren smiled. "It is. You'd like it." "I probably would," Caro Fell said. This was alarming because 48 hours earlier, when I had reviewed Earth's atmospheric and geographic data with Caro Fell as part of our mission briefing, he had described the planet's landscape as unremarkably varied, and its weather systems as chaotic to the point of being statistically aggressive. He had not said anything resembled beauty. He had said it resembled a place with unresolved meteorological disagreements. I updated my incident log. I wrote, "Caro Fell made eye contact. Duration approximately 3 seconds. Awaiting further developments." The further developments arrived almost immediately. "What kind of music?" Caro Fell asked, as if the question had been waiting inside him without his knowledge. "Do people listen to in the Midwest?" Here is the thing about alien diplomats. We do not laugh. Not the way humans laugh. We have what are formally classified in interspecies behavioral documentation as controlled amusement signals, which are small, measured acknowledgments that something has registered as humorous. A brief upturn of the secondary lip, a single soft exhale through the nasal passage, a blink held slightly longer than necessary. These are appropriate responses to humor in a diplomatic setting. They communicate amusement without sacrificing composure. Caro Fell laughed. He laughed the way a person laughs when something catches them completely off guard, and the body decides to respond before the brain has a chance to maintain dignity. He laughed with his entire chest, It was loud. It bounced off the walls of the crew lounge. It was the kind of laugh that, if you heard it without knowing the context, you would assume something had gone extraordinarily well for someone. What had Sable Oren said to produce this? She had told him a story about a seagull. Specifically about a seagull that had stolen her lunch at a place called the Boardwalk when she was 11 years old, pursued her for half a block, and then had the audacity to return and look at her with, and I quote, absolutely no remorse, zero. It looked me dead in the eye, Caro, and I knew. That bird had done this before. That bird had a whole operation going. That was the story. A bird. A stolen lunch. No remorse. Caro Fell laughed for 45 seconds. Thessaly Woon, who had been walking past the lounge entrance with a navigation chart in her hand, stopped walking. She stood there for a moment. Then she stepped into the doorway. "What's the story?" she said. Sable Oren told it again. Thessaly Woon made a sound that I had never in 4 years heard her make. It was short. It was surprised. It was unmistakably a laugh. I sat down at my desk and began composing what I fully intended to be a formal incident report. I opened the document, titled it Behavioral Anomaly Report, Crew Response to Earth Liaison, and wrote the first line, which was, at approximately 14 ship standard time, Junior Diplomat Caro Fell exhibited a departure from standard diplomatic composure. Then I stared at the next blank line for 6 minutes. Then I closed the document without saving it. I would try again later. I did not try again later. By the end of the 3rd day, Bodrak Sim had told Sable Oren the story of how he had once accidentally welded his own tool cabinet shut during a pressurized repair job, and she had listened to the whole thing with such genuine attention and such well-timed responses that Bodrak had ended the story by saying, quietly and with some surprise, "Actually, now that I tell it, it is kind of funny." This was a sentence I had never heard Bodrak Sim say. I was not sure Bodrak Sim had ever found anything funny. He found things functional or non-functional. He found problems and solutions. Funny was not a category he operated in. And yet, I updated my personal notes. The seagull story is apparently a gateway drug, I wrote, and then looked at what I had written and left it there because it was accurate. On the 4th day, the ship's secondary calibration unit failed. This happens occasionally. It is a minor but irritating problem. The kind that does not endanger anyone but creates cascading errors in the environmental monitoring readouts that make everything slightly more annoying for 12 to 14 hours. The repair protocol involves 2 engineers, a specific set of calibration tools, and approximately 3 hours of methodical work. Sable Oren looked at the unit, asked Bodrak Sim 2 questions, and fixed it in 40 minutes using a standard writing instrument. 2 lengths of wire she pulled from a secondary panel with Bodrak's permission, and what she described, completely seriously, as aggressive optimism. Bodrak Sim watched the whole process. He did not offer to help. He stood with his arms crossed, watching, and his expression moved through approximately 4 phases: initial skepticism, reluctant attention, careful interest, and something at the end that I would have to describe as professional respect, which, from Bodrak Sim, is the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "Field repair training," Sable Oren said, already putting the panel back. "And also I broke one of these on a different ship once and had to fix it before anyone noticed." Did anyone notice? One person noticed. He told me it was the best unauthorized repair he'd ever seen. He was right, Bodrak Sim said, which was, for Bodrak, the verbal equivalent of a gold medal ceremony. After the calibration unit, she turned her attention to Thessaly Woon, specifically to the hours that Thessaly spent waiting during transit jumps when there was nothing to navigate and the ship was simply moving. Sable Oren produced a deck of cards, a physical deck, made of a material called cardstock, which is apparently exactly what it sounds like, and which should not be as durable as it turns out to be. She taught Thessaly a game. The game had rules that seemed simple at first, and then revealed themselves to have approximately 11 layers of strategy that only became visible after you had already made a mistake. Thessaly won the first round because Sable let her. The second, third, and fourth rounds went to Sable handily. The fifth round went to Thessaly, who afterward had the specific expression of someone who has been handed a gift and isn't entirely sure if they should feel proud or suspicious. Then Sable won the next 6 rounds. "You let me win that 5th one," Thessaly said. "I did," Sable confirmed, without any embarrassment whatsoever. "Why?" "Because you were getting frustrated, and frustration makes you make different mistakes than boredom does, and I wanted to see which kind you make." Thessaly stared at her. "That is," Thessaly said after a considerable pause, "a very sophisticated reason." "I play a lot of cards," Sable said. She also brought food. This deserves its own mention because what happened when she brought out the food cannot be fairly described as anything other than an event. She had a container of things called biscuits, another container with a selection of dried fruits, something in a sealed packet called trail mix, which she described as not the fancy kind, but honestly the fancy kind is overrated, and a small tin of something she described as my grandmother's recipe for shortbread, and before you ask, no, I'm not giving out the recipe, it goes with me. She described each item with the kind of dedicated enthusiasm that suggested these were not snacks but rather important historical documents that happened to be edible. The biscuits, she explained, were from a bakery near her home station. The dried fruits were from a region of Earth that apparently was famous for them, which she conveyed with the intensity of someone reading from an award citation. The shortbread was non-negotiable in its excellence, and she would not hear otherwise. The crew ate all of it. Dr. Fen Kallick, who had previously issued a standard medical advisory about consuming unsanctioned alien consumables, ate 3 pieces of shortbread. When I raised an eyebrow at him, he said, flatly, "I am conducting a medical assessment," and ate a 4th piece. I want to be very clear about something. I am a professional. I have 42 years of diplomatic service. I have negotiated trade agreements with species that communicate entirely through controlled temperature fluctuations. I once maintained a completely neutral facial expression for 6 hours straight during a territorial dispute summit where the main representative of the opposing party was screaming for the last 4 of those hours. I have composure. I have training. I have discipline. I made a tactical error. My tactical error was deciding that the responsible course of action was to personally monitor Lieutenant Commander Oren at close range rather than relying on crew reports. My reasoning was sound. I told myself I needed direct observational data. I told myself that second-hand accounts were insufficient for a proper behavioral assessment. I told myself that as ambassador, it was my duty to be directly informed. I approached her on the 5th day. She was in the secondary observation lounge, looking out at the stars, with the specific quality of attention that suggested she was not thinking about anything in particular, but was thinking about it very thoroughly. She turned when I entered, and the expression she had when she turned was the exact expression of someone who was genuinely pleased to see whoever had just walked in, regardless of who that happened to be. It was a quality that should have, by any measurable standard, seemed excessive. It did not seem excessive. It seemed, and I am filing this observation reluctantly, genuine. "Ambassador," she said, "come look at this one." She pointed at a particular star cluster in the viewport. She told me its common name, then the Earth name for it, then said, "My father showed it to me when I was small. He said if you could find it, you were never completely lost." She paused. He was talking about navigation, but I always thought it applied to other things too. I looked at the star cluster. It was, objectively, a cluster of stars. I had seen 10,000 star clusters. I had catalogued several. I looked at it for longer than was necessary. She offered me a biscuit. I accepted the biscuit. This was the tactical error, not in isolation perhaps, but what happened next made it the tactical error. She looked at me, not the diplomatic look, not the professional courtesy look, the other look, the direct, warm, fully inhabited look that she had apparently been carrying around this whole time and had been deploying with no apparent awareness of what it does to people who encounter it. I did not look away. The biscuit was, and I am including this in the record because it is relevant to my ongoing assessment of the situation, very good. Slightly crisp on the outside, soft in the middle. Some kind of seed on the top that added a quality I did not have a word for. These two things, the look and the biscuit, became linked in my memory in a way that I could not separate afterward. I am aware this is not ideal for an ambassador. I have decided not to examine it too closely. I stayed in the observation lounge for an hour and 12 minutes. We talked about stars. We talked about what it is like to be far from home for long periods of time. She told me that the first time she was stationed far enough from Earth that she could not find it in the sky with the naked eye, she had stood at a viewport for a long time and then decided that the feeling she was experiencing was not loss, but expansion. Like, she said, the part of me that needed to be close to something familiar had to get bigger to include the whole sky. Does that make sense? It made, I am ashamed to report, complete sense. I walked back to my office afterward and sat in my chair for a while without doing anything in particular. Then I opened the incident report I had started on day 3. I looked at the first line I had written. I closed the document again. I kept the biscuit wrapper on my desk. I told myself it was evidence. The Hasari Collective. If you are unfamiliar with the Hasari, here is a brief summary. They are cold. Not metaphorically. Their biology runs at a lower temperature than most carbon-based life, and their interpersonal style runs at an even lower temperature than their biology. They communicate in precise, measured statements. They do not appreciate embellishment. They do not appreciate warmth. They have a formal greeting that lasts 11 minutes and contains no actual personal content whatsoever, which is, as far as I can tell, the point. The greeting is a demonstration that you can maintain sustained communication without accidentally revealing anything about yourself. 17 previous diplomatic delegations had failed to reach agreement with the Hasari on the resource sharing arrangement that our mission was designed to finalize. 17. I had reviewed all 17 mission reports. The pattern was consistent. The delegations would present their terms. The Hasari would counter with extreme precision. The delegations would attempt to build rapport. The Hasari would observe the rapport building with the mild interest of a scientist watching something react unexpectedly to a stimulus. Nothing would land. The talks would stall. The delegations would go home and write very long reports about the need for a different approach. We were, technically, the different approach. I had not fully processed what that meant until we were standing outside the negotiation chamber door, and I looked at Sable Oren, who was standing with her hands loose at her sides, and the expression of someone who had just decided something. I want to talk first, she said. I considered this. Lieutenant Commander, the Hasari respond best to formal protocol in the opening sequence. I know, she said. I read all 17 reports. She looked at me. Not the direct look this time, the other one. The one that meant she had already thought this through more carefully than the statement made it sound. Let me talk first, she said again. We went in. The Hasari negotiators were 3. They were seated. Their posture was immaculate. Their faces were expressionless in the specific way that is different from a blank face, not an absence of expression, but a deliberate removal of it. The way a surface looks after it has been polished very thoroughly. The lead Hasari negotiator, arbitrator Vesh Koranu, looked at our delegation and began the 11-minute greeting. We sat through it. When it was over, there was the customary pause. Sable Oren leaned forward slightly. She said, Arbitrator Koranu, before we get into the formal exchange, I want to say something. Koranu's eyes moved to her. No expression change. No response. This was, in Hasari communication, an invitation to continue. I've read about your people, Sable said. Not just the negotiation records, the history, the migration period, what it cost, what was lost, what your people chose to protect most carefully when there wasn't room to carry everything. She paused. I want you to know that we're not here to ask you to forget that. We're not here to pretend that trust is easy or that this arrangement doesn't have risks for you. It does. Another pause. I've been part of enough of these agreements to know that the ones that actually hold are the ones where everyone in the room says out loud what they're actually worried about, instead of saying it in formal language that technically means the same thing but sounds like nobody's really worried at all. The room was quiet. Arbitrator Koranu looked at Sable Oren for a period of time that, in Hasari protocol, I had never seen a Hasari look at a non-Hasari representative. It lasted 14 seconds. I counted. Then, and I will include this in my report with full documentation because I understand it will not be believed without it. Arbitrator Vesh Koranu made a sound. It was short. It was quiet. It was unmistakably a laugh. Not a full laugh, a small one, a surprised one. The laugh of someone who had just heard something said out loud that they had been thinking very quietly for a very long time. "You are," Koranu said, in a voice that had lost approximately 40% of its formal distance, "unlike the others." "I've been told," Sable said. The negotiation lasted 6 hours. We reached a preliminary agreement by the 4th hour and spent the remaining 2 refining it. Arbitrator Koranu, by the end, was speaking to Sable Oren in a register I had never heard a Hasari use in a formal context. It was not warm, exactly, but it was direct. It was the register of someone who has decided that the person across the table is worth the effort of actual communication. When we left the chamber, I stood in the corridor for a moment. Caro Fell was next to me. He said nothing. He was looking at the door we had just walked out of. She said out loud, Caro Fell said, slowly, what everyone else puts in formal language. "Yes," I said, and that worked. It did. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to think about that for a long time," he said. "So am I," I said. The mission was, by every official metric, a success. The resource-sharing arrangement was drafted, initialed, and transmitted for full ratification. The Hasari Collective sent a formal acknowledgement that included, in the secondary notation field where boilerplate language usually goes, a single sentence that had no precedent in any Hasari diplomatic communication I could find in the archives. It read, "We found this delegation to be, in the estimation of Arbitrator Koranu, genuinely worth the conversation." I had to sit with that for a while. My mission report was due in 48 hours. I had written mission reports for 42 years. I had written reports about successful negotiations, failed negotiations, negotiations that had turned into something else entirely, and one negotiation that had somehow accidentally become a cultural exchange festival lasting 3 weeks. I had the language for all of these. I had the templates. I had the structure. I opened the document. I stared at it. The standard opening for a successful negotiation report is, "This delegation achieved the stated objective of preliminary agreement on the matter of," and then you fill in the specific terms and note the key factors that contributed to the outcome. Key factors. That was the section I could not write. How do I list? Lieutenant Commander Oren told the Hasari Collective the truth in plain language, and one of them laughed for the first time in 400 years as a key factor in diplomatic success. It is accurate. It is the most accurate thing I could write. But there is no box in the mission report template, for the human said the thing everyone was thinking, and it turned out that was the thing that needed to be said. How do I write the section on crew performance without noting that my junior diplomat now hums Earth music in the corridors? That he does not know he is doing it? That it is somehow not irritating? That Thessali 1 asked Sable Oren to write down the rules of the card game before she left? That Bodrak Sim, who communicates in disapproving exhales, said, during the last evening meal with complete sincerity, "You know how to fix things? Not just the calibration unit. Things." How do I write the section on my own conduct without explaining the biscuit? I wrote the report. I made it accurate. I described the negotiation, the approach, the outcome, the contributing factors in diplomatic language that captured what happened without fully capturing what it meant. I submitted it on time. It was the longest report I have ever submitted. It was also, I suspect, the least complete. The transfer order came on the 8th day. Lieutenant Commander Sable Oren was reassigned to the Meridian Station for her next diplomatic posting. The order was routine. It had the standard language. It listed the new assignment, the departure window, the transport coordinates. I told the crew at morning briefing. Caro Fell went quiet. Thessaly 1 looked at her navigation display for a moment longer than the display required. Bodrak Sim exhaled. Dr. Fen Kalik said, with the precise delivery of someone choosing carefully, "That's soon," and did not say anything else. Sable Oren packed her 2 bags. This took her approximately 20 minutes, which is either because she travels very light or because she does not put much weight on accumulating things. I suspect both are true. She said goodbye the way humans say goodbye, which is to say that she said it in a way that does not sound like goodbye at all. She said it the way someone says, "I'll see you around," to a neighbor they genuinely like, with the full and unexamined confidence that the universe is smaller than it looks, and paths cross again if you let them. She said it like the ending of something was also the beginning of something else, and she was reasonably sure she knew which part came next. She told Thessaly 1 that she was a very good navigator and also an excellent card player, which she said with specific emphasis that I understood was intentional and kind. She told Bodrak Sim that the calibration unit would hold for at least 2 more years, and if it didn't, the fix was simple and she had left the instructions in the ship's manual under Field Modifications, Unauthorized Successful. She told Dr. Fen Kallik that the shortbread tin was for him and she was choosing to believe he would share it, knowing full well he might not. She got to Karo Fel. He was standing very straight in the way that young diplomats stand when they are trying to perform composure. She looked at him. He had apparently not forgotten what happened the last time he looked back. He looked back anyway. "Keep asking questions," she said. "The good ones. The ones they didn't put in the briefing packets." Karo Fel nodded. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Then he raised his hand in a wave. It was slightly awkward. It was completely human. He looked surprised at himself. She waved back. "She got to me last." I had prepared a formal farewell statement. It was 6 sentences. It covered her service, her contribution to the mission, the standard expressions of goodwill for her future posting. I had rehearsed it. It was appropriate. It was professional. "Ambassador," she said. "Lieutenant Commander," I said. She held out her hand. Solvarans do not shake hands. It is not in our cultural repertoire. I knew this. She knew this. She had spent 8 days on our ship. She was fully aware. I shook her hand. It lasted 2 seconds. It was a completely standard human handshake. My training had no framework for it. I had no protocol to follow, no formal script, no precedent in 42 years of diplomatic service. It was fine. It was more than fine. She walked down the docking tunnel. She did not look back, not because she was indifferent, but because she was the kind of person who trusts that the things she is leaving are solid enough to remain. The docking bay was quiet. Karo Fel was still waving to an empty tunnel. I walked back to my office. I sat at my desk. I looked at the biscuit wrapper that was sitting in the corner of the desk where I had left it on the 5th day. I had told myself it was evidence. I had told myself many things this week that turned out to be less accurate than I presented them. I opened my desk drawer. I put the biscuit wrapper inside. I closed the drawer. I went back to work. The ship was the same ship it had been 8 days ago. Same corridors, same consoles, same recycled air with the slight metallic undertone that no amount of filtration ever fully removes. Same everything, except Karo Fel was humming something in the corridor, a simple repeating melody with no official designation in any Solvaran musical registry, and it was, for reasons I chose not to audit too carefully, not unpleasant. Except Thessaly 1 had the card game rules folded in her coat pocket and had already asked Bodrak Sim if he wanted to learn. Except Dr. Fen Kallik had, as I passed the medical bay, eaten a piece of shortbread with the specific expression of a man who is making a memory. Except I knew where to find that star cluster now, the one with the Earth name, and what someone's father had said about it. The ship was the same. We were not quite the same. I am not sure the difference between those two things had ever seemed so relevant. 6 standard weeks after the conclusion of the Hasari mission, the Solvaran Diplomatic Corps updated the official orientation packet for all incoming alien envoys assigned to interact with Earth diplomatic personnel. The update was specific to one individual. It added a new page, page 18. It read as follows: regarding Lieutenant Commander Sable Orin, Earth Diplomatic Liaison, Serial Assignment Record 7 Goltha 92. Personnel assigned to interact with Lieutenant Commander Orin are advised to observe the following precautions. Do not make sustained eye contact. Do not accept food from her hands. Do not allow her unsupervised access to ship systems, even minor ones, especially minor ones. Do not engage her in any competitive activity unless you are prepared to lose and to have the experience of losing be somehow enjoyable. Do not ask her questions unless you are prepared for the answer to matter more than you expected. Above all, do not let her make you laugh. Once she makes you laugh, you have already lost the professional distance the Corps recommends for effective diplomatic detachment. Proceed accordingly. Below the official text, in the space that was technically the bottom margin, someone had added a handwritten note. The handwriting was mine. I am aware of this. I added it myself. I submitted the packet with it included and did not remove it when my supervisor asked if the margin note was intentional. It was intentional. It said, in the space between the last official word and the edge of the page, "Too late for us. Good luck." The sticky note from the previous envoy, the one that just said "don't," was moved to page 1. It now serves as the foreword. I checked the assignment records last week. Lieutenant Commander Sable Oren has been assigned to 4 additional diplomatic missions since the Hisari negotiation. All 4 resulted in agreements. One of them involved a species that had not agreed to anything with anyone in 60 years. The mission report from that posting, filed by a Thalvari envoy named Arbitrator Sen Dovak, was 312 pages long. The last line read, "She told us a story about a bird. I know that story. I know exactly what the bird did.